In this video, I'm going to show you how to make a felled seam. This is the preferred seam for denim garments, as it's strong and gives a clean finish on the inside. The seam allowance for a felled seam is 2.5 centimetres. In the first instance, place your fabric together with the wrong sides of the fabric together and the sides edges matched up. Use the guide on the throat plate to give you a straight and even seam. It looks like a large seam allowance, but you'll see that you need it all. We're going to cut down one side of the seam allowance, the side that you want to have the top stitching on. Take a pattern master or a set square. On the side that you want to cut down, mark 1 centimetre from the sewing line along the seam allowance. Now you only want to cut down this piece of the seam allowance, not both sides. So take care to fold it underneath when you use the scissors. Carefully cut that side of the seam allowance down to 1 centimetre. Now we're going to fold over the seam allowance over the other side of the seam allowance. So you want to fold this large side over the small side. Take it to the iron and press it. It looks odd because the seam allowance is actually on the right side of the garment, but this will become clear in a minute. What we're going to do is stitch down this seam allowance. Fold it over and put it to the machine and use the inside edge of the foot along the folded edge of the seam allowance to guide you and edge stitch all the way down the seam allowance through all the layers of fabric. And that's the felled seam finished. As you can see, it's neat on the right side and it's clean on the inside of the garment. There is a variation that you can do on a felled seam. This is adding a frayed edge to the seam. You could also insert piping in here if you wanted to instead. Instead of cutting the underneath side of the seam allowance down, leave it extending out past the folded edge. Still press under the seam allowance to fold under, but you don't fold it round. Instead you just fold it on top and edge stitch it down. This will give you a little bit of fabric sticking out from the seam allowance on the right side of the garment. You can now carefully fray this piece of fabric because it's a raw edge. Either use your fingernails or you can use a pin and gradually take off the bits of fabric until you've got a fringe. This works quite well with denim because you've got two different colours of yarn in a denim fabric. It's still clean on the inside, but you've got a bit of decoration on the outside.